Rece Davis and Desmond Howard with us here. Rece, I would like to just hear your thoughts, as obviously you are following this as closely as anybody. We've had Heather with all of her information this morning. What is your perspective as we wake up this morning and feel like the college football season really may be hanging in the balance?
Greeny, I think the biggest thing that I tried to get to with several people I spoke with last night is what caused this sudden about face. It was just a couple of days ago that we were releasing schedules and getting specific about how games would be played. And then all of a sudden this pivoted to the Power 5 conferences considering not playing. It's really the first time that has left me feeling pessimistic about the season actually occurring. From the very beginning, you and I have spoken about this. I felt as if somehow, some way, that the games would be able to be played and hopefully safely. There are so many, additional issues to this about how the testing is being conducted, the quasi bubbles, maybe for lack of a better term, that most of these players are in, at least at the highest level of the games, and whether that is an acceptable way to try to limit the spread on campuses. There are a lot of issues, but it seemed that college football, the leaders in that sport, had determined that this was a course of action they could undertake. And then the pivot surprised me a little bit, at least how quickly it pivoted to the potential for shutting it down.
What answers were you able to get? Those are the right questions. How did it go from the Big Ten releasing their schedule on Wednesday to their presidents having a conversation on Saturday morning talking about canceling the season? What answers have you gotten?
I'm not sure any that were totally definitive, but one thing that seems to have popped up is that maybe the fact that the Big Ten was attempting or is attempting to start play a little earlier than some of the other conferences, which necessitated them going into pads a little earlier, which perhaps made them a little more nervous. And then you had the other issues. I think there's been a player in that conference at Indiana who has had some cardiac issues that they believe has been linked to his positive coronavirus test and case that he has dealt with. And all of those things, I think, bring into other questions, because there's still a lot of things that we don't know about the virus, but then there's also quite a bit of data that shows that young people at that age are not as susceptible. So the question becomes, Greeny, what's responsible? What's right? What responsibilities do the institutions have to let the public know about, what they've discovered, at least in terms of their testing? So all of those things, I think, are factors, and perhaps are making some of the presidents really across the country, but particularly in the Big Ten, a little bit skittish.
Desmond, all of us who work in this industry and are on social media are hearing from some fans who are saying, well, why is it that they're able to play baseball and they're going to be able to play in the NFL and they're able to play these other sports and not college football? What is the right response to that question, Des?
Well, the right response to that question, Green, is that when you look at the great revenue-generating sports, which is what college football actually is, a $4 billion industry, the powers to be in college sports and college football, they have a decision to make based on student athletes. Now, when you look at the NFL, you look at the NBA, you look at Major League Baseball, these are grown men who are making millions of dollars, who have a union. They have a union that looks out for their best interests. The players at Northwestern tried to form a union in 2015, and they were denied. So the players don't have a union, a voice. They don't make any money like the professionals, but yet it's a $4 billion industry. And so the reason why the powers that be, the presidents of these universities, they're starting to look at this differently, because if they are student athletes, which the NCAA and Mark Emmert has been trying to push for this whole amateurism for years and years, if they're student athletes, then you have to take in consideration, if you're not going to have students on campus, how are you going to bring the athletes on campus? Then that's a whole big problem that they don't want to address. So there's a big difference between the professional athletes and what college presidents, they have to deal with, and the decisions that they have to make based on student athletes.
So, Rece, if I'm a college football fan, all those who are watching and are interested in where this is headed, what things should we be paying attention to as this week goes on? What questions will you be asking, and what should college fans be paying attention to try and figure out what's going on and what happens next?
I think because the Big Ten seems to be the one that's out in front of this, even though, as Heather Denich has pointed out rightly, none of the conferences want to be the first, nor do they want to be the last, to postpone or cancel the season. But I think look and see whether the season is further delayed. Will they decide to push the start of their season back into September? That, to me, would indicate a willingness to at least try to continue on and push on and play. Desmond, and I'm sure you're short on time here, Green. Desmond brought up a lot of very interesting points and great points. And one of the things that I've raised with probably half dozen to 10 people over the last couple of days is whether the player organizing efforts from the Pac-12 and the Big Ten have had an impact on this change of thinking. And I initially suspected that was so, at least according to the people I talked to, that they certainly care about this, but it hasn't had the impact, at least in their judgment, the people I talked to, of slowing down the season. But, the one thing that someone pointed out to me last night is that while Desmond is correct, they don't have a union. There's certainly some revenue issues. Greeny, you and I have talked about a number of times over the years that we feel like the players should have some more freedom in that regard. But I had one administrator say to me last night, he said, we're looking out for them. He said the basketball players wanted to play the tournament this spring, and we did not think that was in their best interest. The baseball players wanted to play, and we didn't think it was in their best interest. He said, and while the revenue is important, he said, I'm not going to lie to you and pretend like it's not. He said, we are doing our best to act in the players' best interest. Now, I'm sure some will take exception to that, but, I thought it was an interesting point because there was certainly some, as it pertains to revenue, there was some revenue lost in basketball as well back in the spring.
No question. That is overwhelmingly outside of football. The NCAA makes almost all of its money